It started like any other congressional hearing. Rows of suits, carefully rehearsed faces, and the quiet hum of cameras ready to catch another meaningless political performance. But then Jasmine Crockett leaned forward. Her gaze sharpened, her tone lowered, and the room began to sense it. This wasn't going to be another safe exchange. Across from her sat Kash Patel, once Trump's loyal aide, now trying to dodge accountability like a man dancing on a live wire. He had swagger when he entered, that smirk that says, "I've done this before." But he hadn't faced her. Crockett didn't come to grandstand. She came armed with facts, precision, and one devastating question that would pierce straight through his defenses. She had studied every document, every statement, every contradiction he'd made in his quest to rewrite history. Patel, smirking, adjusted his tie. "Congresswoman, I think you're confused about how the process works." That was his first mistake. Crockett's eyes narrowed. "Oh, I assure you, Mr. Patel, I'm crystal clear. But I think the real confusion lies in your testimony, and in the way you've tried to twist the truth about your involvement." A low murmur spread across the room. The temperature dropped. The air thickened with tension. Then she asked it. The question. The one that would turn the hearing upside down. "Mr. Patel," she said, voice steady, slicing through the silence, "if you claim you had no influence on those intelligence briefings, then why does your signature appear on the classified memo ordering their release?" The smirk vanished. The pause that followed stretched long enough for the cameras to capture his every flicker of panic. For the first time, Kash Patel, the man who prided himself on being untouchable, looked cornered, and in that single moment, the power dynamic shifted entirely. Jasmine Crockett wasn't just questioning a witness. She was dismantling a wall of political deceit. One line at a time, the audience didn't just watch. They felt it. The tension, the truth, the raw electricity of accountability finally catching up to arrogance. Kash Patel shifted in his seat, that signature confidence cracking like glass under pressure. Cameras zoomed in. Every blink, every twitch, every forced half-smile was now broadcast across the nation. He tried to recover, to summon the charm that had once carried him through countless softball interviews. "Congresswoman, I think you're misinterpreting—" Crockett cut in smoothly, voice like a scalpel. "Oh, I'm not misinterpreting, Mr. Patel. I'm reading your words. I'm reading the dates. I'm reading the document you signed." The audience behind her murmured again. Patel's throat tightened. He looked down at the stack of papers on the desk before him, flipping through them as if the answers would suddenly rewrite themselves. Crockett leaned back slightly, her expression calm but unyielding. "See, this isn't about spin. This isn't about loyalty. This is about the truth. And the truth has a way of catching up to people who think they're above it." Patel chuckled nervously. "With all due respect, Congresswoman, I've worked in national security for years. I know how intelligence works." Crockett's eyebrow arched. "And yet somehow you don't seem to know how accountability works." The room froze. Even the sound technicians stopped moving. Every eye was now locked on Patel, whose composure slipped further with each passing second. She reached for a folder and flipped it open. "This memo, Mr. Patel, dated 3 days before your public denial. It bears your signature. It authorizes the release of classified information. Are you telling this committee that someone forged your name?" Patel hesitated. "I'm saying I don't recall that specific—" "Ah," she interrupted, tone sharp but controlled. "So now you don't recall. Convenient. Because earlier in this same hearing, you testified under oath that you reviewed every document personally. Which one is it, Mr. Patel?" He stammered. His mouth opened, then closed. His eyes darted to his counsel, who whispered something frantically. The audience caught the exchange, and a ripple of tension spread like wildfire. Crockett's voice softened, but that softness was pure steel. "You see, Mr. Patel, it's easy to posture on television. It's easy to sell a version of yourself when the lights are friendly. But this is sworn testimony. This is truth under oath, and the truth doesn't need a PR team." Her words hung in the air like smoke after an explosion. Patel exhaled, forced a smile, and muttered, "Congresswoman, I think this line of questioning is politically motivated." Crockett didn't blink. If holding you accountable for your own words feels like politics to you, then maybe that says more about your actions than my questions. A quiet gasp rippled through the chamber. Even Patel's attorney leaned back, defeated. The tension had shifted again. Completely. At that moment, Jasmine Crockett wasn't just a congresswoman. She was the embodiment of composure under fire. And Patel, stripped of his rehearsed defenses, had nowhere left to hide. The hearing wasn't over, not by a long shot, but one truth had already landed. The era of political spin had met its reckoning in Jasmine Crockett's cross-examination chair. Kash Patel sat frozen, the color draining from his face as Jasmine Crockett's last words echoed through the chamber. The silence that followed wasn't the polite kind. It was electric, the kind that burns under the skin. Even the cameras seemed to hesitate before zooming in again, as though they, too, sensed something irreversible was unfolding. Patel cleared his throat, tried to reassemble the pieces of his crumbling composure. "Congresswoman Crockett," he began, voice cracking slightly. "I think it's important to remember that context matters here. These decisions, they're not made in isolation. There's nuance. There's interpretation." Crockett leaned forward, her tone measured but unrelenting. "Interpretation doesn't change signatures, Mr. Patel. Facts don't bend because someone important wishes they did." Her eyes locked onto his like a spotlight cutting through fog. "What you're calling nuance, most Americans would call dishonesty." The tension rippled again. Somewhere behind the cameras, a staffer coughed to break the unbearable quiet. Patel adjusted his tie, desperate for air, desperate for ground to stand on. "With respect, Congresswoman," he said, forcing a smirk that didn't reach his eyes. "I'm not on trial here." "Oh, I know," Crockett replied smoothly. "You're just under oath." The audience broke into muffled laughter, the kind that dances between shock and delight. Patel's smirk vanished. He looked to the chairperson for rescue, but the gavel stayed still. The committee wanted to see how this ended. "Everyone did," Crockett continued, voice calm but with a subtle fire that grew with every word. "You sat before this body and told us that you acted with transparency and integrity. Yet the documents show otherwise. You authorized leaks, you misled investigators, and now you're trying to hide behind semantics," Patel interjected, his tone defensive now. "Congresswoman, I've dedicated years to this country. I've served in positions that require trust, sacrifice, and judgment. To suggest otherwise is..." Crockett didn't flinch. "What I'm suggesting, Mr. Patel, is that patriotism isn't a costume you wear when it's convenient. It's a responsibility. And when that responsibility is broken, the uniform, the title, the years, none of it shields you from accountability." Her words landed like punches wrapped in velvet. Patel blinked rapidly, his practiced responses evaporating under the sheer precision of her logic. The tension was no longer just in the room, it was national. The hearing was being streamed live. Millions were watching. Social media had already ignited. On Twitter, hashtags like Not Crockett vs. Patel and Ag Truth Bomb in Congress began trending. Commentators rushed to post clips of her most searing lines. TikTok creators started looping her "patriotism isn't a costume" moment, setting it to dramatic music. Meanwhile, Patel fumbled for an escape route. "I'm not sure what you're implying, but these are politically motivated attacks designed to discredit me," he said, gripping his pen so tightly it nearly snapped. Crockett's reply was immediate. "The only person discrediting you, Mr. Patel, is sitting in that chair. And the irony? You handed me the evidence yourself." Patel's jaw clenched. His lips parted, but nothing came out. Every camera, every microphone, every pair of eyes in the room was locked on him. Crockett took a slow breath, her tone softening. But that softness was deliberate, surgical. "You know, Mr. Patel, when people in power try to rewrite the truth, they always forget something. The truth doesn't care who's sitting in the chair. It just waits." That line struck deeper than any accusation could. Patel shifted again, his gaze dropping to the papers on the table. Papers that suddenly felt like indictments. Crockett continued, her voice resonating with quiet authority. "The American people are tired of excuses. They're tired of seeing loyalty to the powerful outweigh loyalty to the truth. So today, we're not here for politics. We're here for accountability." She glanced toward the camera, just for a heartbeat, as if speaking directly to every viewer at home. "Because accountability isn't partisan. It's patriotic." The audience erupted in hushed awe. Patel sat still, utterly dismantled, his confidence shattered not by shouting or anger, but by Crockett's calm, relentless truth. And though the session wasn't over yet, the battle had already been decided. The moment Kash Patel slumped in his chair defeated, the entire room shifted. It wasn't just that Jasmine Crockett had won the exchange, it was how she had done it. No theatrics, no shouting match, just calm precision, truth delivered like poetry sharpened to a blade. The crowd behind her, Aides, reporters, staffers whispered among themselves. Cameras zoomed in to catch the glint in Crockett's eyes. She wasn't finished. Not yet. "Mr. Patel," she said, her tone steady. "I want you to understand something. This isn't about embarrassing you. This is about accountability. Something too many in your position seem to mistake for hostility." Her voice carried the weight of conviction. It wasn't just directed at Patel anymore. It was for the nation watching. Millions sitting in living rooms, scrolling through live streams, were nodding in unison. Accountability, she continued, isn't an attack. It's a mirror. And when people don't like what they see in it, they call it unfair. They call it political. But really, they just don't like the reflection. That line, crisp, cinematic, struck a chord. Even some members on the opposing side of the aisle shifted uncomfortably. The truth of it was undeniable. Patel opened his mouth to speak, but Crockett raised a hand slightly. Not rudely, but with authority that demanded the floor. "Let me finish," she said, voice low but commanding. "Because this isn't just about you. It's about what happens when people in power think the rules are for everyone else." The room was silent again. She leaned forward, her tone growing warmer, more human. "You see, I come from a place where accountability wasn't optional, where your word meant something, where integrity wasn't a luxury, but it was survival." A murmur of agreement rippled behind her. Crockett continued, her voice now threading emotion with intellect. "I didn't come to Congress to play these games. I came here because I watched too many good people, honest people, get buried by the lies of those who thought they'd never be held to account. And I'll be damned if I let that cycle continue." The camera caught Patel looking down again, avoiding her gaze. He wasn't just losing an argument. He was witnessing a dismantling of the entire performance that had defined his career. Crockett paused, letting the silence do the talking. Then she spoke, softly, almost like confiding in the public. "You know what's funny, Mr. Patel? Every time someone like me asks a tough question, the first response is always outrage. 'How dare she?' they say. 'Who does she think she is?'" She looked directly into the camera, the faintest smile tugging at her lips. "I'll tell you who I am. I'm someone who refuses to accept that power means privilege. I'm someone who believes that service means serving the truth. And if that makes people uncomfortable, then maybe discomfort is exactly what this country needs right now." Her words cut through the air like a sermon for a restless nation. The crowd leaned in, captivated. Even those who disagreed with her politically couldn't look away. There was something magnetic about her composure, her refusal to bend or break under pressure. Patel sat in silence. His attorney whispered something in his ear, but it was too late. The narrative had turned. Crockett gathered her papers slowly, purposefully. "This country doesn't need more excuses," she said. "It needs examples. And today, the example is clear. Truth doesn't need a defense. It just needs a voice." That line landed with the weight of history. The room erupted. Applause from the audience, murmurs from the press. The unmistakable sound of a cultural moment taking shape in real time. As she leaned back in her chair, the faintest smile appeared on her face. Not arrogance, but quiet resolve. She had done what few could, dismantle power with grace. And yet, beneath that composure, everyone could feel it. The storm wasn't over. Because what came next would turn this hearing from a confrontation into a national reckoning. The real explosion was still to come. It began like any other question. Quiet, deliberate, almost understated. But by the time Jasmine Crockett reached the end of her sentence, the entire hearing room had gone still. "Mr. Patel," she said, leaning forward just enough to command attention. "If you were so confident in your actions, if you truly believed they were lawful and justified, then why did you personally request that your communications be wiped from government servers the very next day?" The words hit like a thunderclap. Kash Patel's eyes widened. His lawyer froze mid-note. Cameras snapped to focus, the sound of shutters clicking like gunfire in the silence that followed. Everyone in the chamber, staffers, reporters, even rival members of Congress, turned their heads toward Patel. I'm not sure what you're referring to," Patel stammered. His voice trembled just enough to betray the fear beneath his polished exterior. Crockett didn't blink. "Oh, I think you are," she said, her tone cool as marble. "Because the request came from your personal login, time-stamped, dated 7:46 a.m., the same morning you went on national television to say you had nothing to hide." The crowd gasped. Even members who had been half listening now sat forward, sensing history in motion. Patel tried to recover. Congresswoman, that's a gross mischaracterization. Those deletions were standard procedure. She cut in sharply. Standard procedure doesn't require a personal override code. The blow landed. Patel blinked rapidly, his hand gripping the table. For the first time, his voice faltered completely. That's not how it happened. Crockett leaned closer, her voice dropping. Not to intimidate, but to pierce through the noise. Then explain it to me. Explain to the American people why documents tied directly to a national security inquiry were deleted under your name. And why, Mr. Patel, the only surviving email from that chain is the one where you wrote, quote, Handle this before anyone asks questions. The room exploded in murmurs. Patel's mouth opened, but no sound came out. He looked to the chairperson, to his counsel, to the cameras, anywhere but at Jasmine Crockett. Crockett waited a beat, then spoke again, her voice calm but layered with fire. You see, this is what happens when power becomes comfortable, when people think they can manipulate the truth and no one will notice. But people are watching. They're paying attention. They're done being lied to. She held up the printed email chain for all to see. This isn't conjecture. This isn't rumor. It's your own words, Mr. Patel. You tried to erase the truth. But here's the thing about erasing the truth. It always leaves fingerprints. A collective exhale rippled through the room. Journalists were already typing furiously. On social media, clips of the moment were being posted and reposted, each caption more explosive than the last. Handle, this was already trending. Patel's lawyer finally leaned in, whispering in his ear. Patel looked pale, sweat glistening on his forehead. He mumbled something inaudible. Crockett didn't need to press further. The damage was done. But she did anyway, not out of cruelty, but conviction. You can say whatever you want here today, Mr. Patel. You can dodge. You can deflect. But you can't unwrite your own emails. You can't undo the evidence. And you sure can't erase the truth in front of the American people. Patel lowered his gaze. His silence was louder than any admission. Crockett sat back, composed, as if the exchange had cost her nothing. But the audience could feel it. Something seismic had shifted. The power dynamic was no longer in question. She ended the moment with one line that would echo across social media and late-night commentary for weeks to come. Power doesn't protect you from the truth, Mr. Patel. It just delays the moment it catches up. The gavel struck once, sharp, final, symbolic. The hearing would continue, but everyone in that room knew the tide had turned. And for Jasmine Crockett, this wasn't the climax. It was the beginning of something much larger. A reckoning that would travel far beyond those four walls. The hearing had barely adjourned when the internet erupted. Within minutes of Jasmine Crockett's final line, power doesn't protect you from the truth, Mr. Patel. It just delays the moment it catches up. The clip was everywhere. News anchors scrambled to replay the footage. Pundits were cutting emergency segments, and social media turned into a digital battleground. On TikTok, creators looped the quote with dramatic music, adding captions like "When the truth finally hits" and "Jasmine Crockett 2028. Twitter, or what was now called X, lit up with hashtags like "Nar Crockett vs Patel," "Handle this" and "Our Truth Wins." CNN ran it on a loop. Fox tried to spin it. MSNBC called it a masterclass in composure and courage. The next morning, every major newspaper had Crockett's photo splashed across the front page. Mid-sentence, finger poised, eyes locked on Patel like a laser. The Washington Post headline read, "Crockett corners, Patel, a hearing." That changed the tone in Washington. But the real story wasn't in the media, it was in the people. Clips from the hearing became rallying cries for transparency and accountability. High school teachers showed it in civics classes. College debate teams analyzed her rhetorical technique. Civil rights groups used her words in speeches about justice and truth, and while Patel's team tried to downplay the damage, their silence only made it worse. Late-night hosts joked about him trying to reboot mid-sentence. One even quipped, "Kash Patel learned the hard way that you don't try to gaslight a woman who came prepared with the receipts." Meanwhile, Crockett stayed quiet, publicly at least. No interviews, no victory lap, no sound bites. Just silence. And that silence spoke volumes. Reporters camped outside her office, waiting for a statement. Her communications director politely turned them away with the same phrase. The Congresswoman said what she needed to say. But behind the scenes, Crockett's team was stunned by the wave of support. Donations poured in. Volunteers signed up. Her inbox was flooded with messages. For Crockett, it wasn't just validation. It was confirmation that the truth still resonated, that integrity, though mocked and underestimated, could still go viral. One message, handwritten and delivered to her office, stood out among thousands. It came from a retired judge in Georgia. The note read, "I watched your exchange with Mr. Patel. I've presided over countless hearings, but few moments have reminded me that justice still lives in the hearts of those who dare to confront lies head-on. Never lose that fire. It's what keeps democracy breathing." Crockett kept that letter on her desk. As the days passed, Patel's narrative collapsed further. A congressional ethics committee announced a follow-up inquiry. Former allies distanced themselves. His PR team vanished from public view. The once untouchable political insider had been undone by one question, and one woman's refusal to be intimidated. And yet, even as the world labeled it a win, Jasmine Crockett didn't celebrate. She viewed it differently. In her mind, this wasn't about destroying a man's career. It was about restoring something far greater: accountability, truth, and trust in the institutions that had been corroded for too long. When she finally broke her silence, it wasn't in a press conference or an interview. It was a simple post on social media. A black background, white text, "Truth doesn't shout." It stands. It went viral within minutes, shared by celebrities, activists, even rival politicians who couldn't help but admire the quiet power of that line. The moment had transcended politics. It had become something else, a cultural mirror. Crockett hadn't just challenged a man. She had reminded a nation what moral courage looks like, and while the media framed it as the moment Patel fell, those who truly understood knew the deeper truth. It was the moment. Jasmine Crockett rose. In the days following the viral confrontation, Washington felt different. There was a subtle but undeniable shift, the kind that happens when someone pierces through the noise and forces the country to listen. Jasmine Crockett hadn't just dismantled Kash Patel in a heated exchange. She had reignited a conversation about truth, power, and the courage it takes to speak up when the room wants you silent. Across Capitol Hill, whispers spread. Lawmakers who once dismissed Crockett as too outspoken began to take notice. In private meetings, aides replayed clips of her questioning, analyzing her tone, precision, and command of facts. Even those who disagreed with her politics admitted she was prepared, sharp, and unflinching. She didn't raise her voice to dominate. She raised it to defend. By the end of the week, her speech had been quoted in at least a dozen political op-eds. Editorials debated whether her style marked a new era of congressional discourse, one where authenticity replaced rehearsed talking points, and facts carried more weight than partisan spin. Outside Washington, the response was even more profound. Civil rights organizations invited her to speak at leadership summits. Universities requested her for commencement addresses. Community leaders across the country reached out, saying her composure in that moment had inspired young women, especially women of color, to believe that standing their ground in the face of authority wasn't defiance, but duty. Late-night television hosts replayed the viral clip nightly. But it wasn't just a meme, it became a metaphor. The Crockett effect, one journalist called it, when truth cuts through performance and lands like a punch. Meanwhile, Patel's silence grew louder. He issued no statements, no interviews, no clarifications. Every attempt to spin the narrative failed because the public had already made up its mind. Crockett's authenticity had struck a chord too deep to be undone by political PR. But for Jasmine, the moment's impact was less about politics and more about people. During a town hall days later, she was asked what gave her the courage to stand so firm. Her answer was simple. "I didn't speak for the cameras. I spoke because I was tired of watching truth be treated like it was optional." That line, powerful in its simplicity, spread almost as fast as her original confrontation. Within hours, it was printed on shirts, quoted in articles, and even turned into protest signs. It was clear now, Jasmine Crockett hadn't just won an argument. She had started a movement, one built not on anger but on accountability. Not on noise, but on conviction. Her moment with Kash Patel wasn't just a political clash, it was a cultural reset. It reminded the nation that in a world of scripted outrage, genuine courage still commands attention. And somewhere in the heart of Washington, people began asking a quiet but vital question. What if more of our leaders spoke like that? When the lights dimmed and the cameras stopped rolling, the echo of Jasmine Crockett's voice still lingered in the chamber. Her confrontation with Kash Patel had electrified the nation, but behind the calm, razor-sharp exterior that millions had just witnessed. There was a woman finally exhaling after days of immense pressure. Inside her office, Jasmine sat quietly for the first time in hours. The door clicked shut, muting the chaos of reporters outside. Her staff was still buzzing, phones lighting up, social media feeds exploding with praise and controversy alike. Yet Jasmine didn't rush to celebrate. She knew what came next. The scrutiny, the spin, the inevitable attempts to twist her words into sound bites that fit someone else's narrative. Her communications director entered the room, phone in hand. "You're trending #1 on X and #3 on YouTube. Everyone's talking about it." Jasmine smiled faintly. "Yeah," she said softly. "They always talk louder when a woman refuses to bow." It wasn't arrogance. It was fatigue mixed with resolve. For every viral clip of a sharp takedown, there were hours of prep, nights spent combing through transcripts, and mornings of quiet prayer before stepping into yet another high-stakes hearing. Jasmine knew her composure wasn't accidental. It was armor forged in years of being underestimated. That night, she returned home to a dark, quiet apartment. The city hummed outside, but for a moment, she let herself feel the weight of it all. She replayed the confrontation in her head. Patel's smug interruptions, the subtle smirks, the way he tried to corner her with vague accusations. She could still feel the pulse in her wrist as she fired back with precision. But what hit her the hardest wasn't his arrogance. It was the realization that millions of people, especially young Black women, had seen her stand her ground without flinching. In that, she felt both pride and responsibility. Her phone buzzed, a text from her mother. "You were brilliant. Daddy would be proud." That one message broke through the steel wall she'd built all day. Jasmine smiled, wiping a tear she hadn't realized had formed. For all the headlines and praise, that single text meant more than any viral clip could. The next morning, she stepped back into the chaos with her head held high. But she noticed the change. Colleagues who once dismissed her now offered tight smiles or avoided eye contact altogether. Others approached with newfound respect, their voices lower, their tone more careful. Power had shifted, even if no one dared to say it aloud. Later, in a brief meeting, a senior congressman, one known for dismissing her during earlier hearings, said, "You've got guts, Crockett. Didn't think you'd go toe-to-toe with him like that." She looked him dead in the eye. "That's the problem. You didn't think." It was classic Jasmine, composed, cutting, and completely unafraid. But what most people didn't see was how much restraint it took to stay composed under constant provocation. Behind every calm rebuttal was the urge to shout. Behind every poised response was the pain of knowing her integrity would be questioned simply because she was her. Still, Jasmine never let them see that side, because she knew her strength wasn't just about defending herself. It was about proving that intelligence, grace, and conviction could silence even the loudest rooms. And though the world was still buzzing with debates, hashtags, and headlines, Jasmine Crockett sat quietly, knowing one truth above all: the moment may have ended. But the movement had just begun. As the dust settled, one thing was undeniable. Jasmine Crockett had turned what was meant to be a trap into a masterclass in composure and conviction. Kash Patel's smugness, once echoing through the chamber, now hung heavy in silence. The very man who tried to undermine her intelligence had been dismantled, not through rage, but through reason. Clips of the exchange flooded every corner of social media. Millions watched her final words again and again, the calm stare, the unshakable tone, the line that stopped him cold. It wasn't just a viral moment. It was a cultural shift. Jasmine hadn't just defended herself. She'd defended every person who's ever been talked over, dismissed, or underestimated. She'd shown that power doesn't always roar. Sometimes it cuts with precision. By nightfall, pundits tried spinning it, critics scrambled for damage control, and yet none could erase what the world had seen. A woman standing firm, unbothered, and unbroken. In that silence, after her final words hung in the air, America saw something rare: truth spoken without fear. And in that truth, a movement found its heartbeat. So if you watched that moment and felt something stir, that spark of pride, that fire for justice, don't let it fade. Stand with the voices that won't bend, won't break, and won't back down. Because tonight, Jasmine Crockett didn't just silence one man. She reminded an entire nation that courage, when spoken with clarity, doesn't need permission to be heard.